Okay, well, welcome to everybody online and welcome to everybody here to our hybrid talk this afternoon. This is one of many events, part of our 85th anniversary series. So it's lovely to have you here. We will be recording the talk, but we won't be recording the discussion. So any questions for those of you online, if you could put them into the chat. Jessica's monitoring the chat, and then there'll be plenty of time afterwards for questions and discussions. And for those of you who are here in person, we've also got out some of the original records. So if you've got time afterwards, and you can have a look at some of the original material that Claire and Hester have used. So we're really grateful for Claire and Hester to be here today. On a practical note, there's no fire drill planned, so if it goes off, it goes off. Just follow us through there. I have to say that. So Claire is director of the Institute of Historical Research and trustee of the Mass Observation Archive, and Hester is professor of modern history at the University of Sussex. I'm very much looking forward to this talk today on their book, The Class of 37. So I'll hand over to them.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be back at the Keep and doing an in-person thing for mass observation, having done a few online things recently. So, as Kirsty said, we're talking about our book, Class of 37, which was published in 2021, which seems like about 100 years ago now, but was only 2 years ago, according to maths. And then the paperback came out last year. The book is based around material from mass observation, housed here and on show there. For those online, it's on a trolley. And today's talk is part of a series of events organised to celebrate mass observation's 85th anniversary.
So, I mean, given this is part of the series, we're assuming that probably most people know a little bit about mass observation. In case anyone doesn't, it was set up, social research organisation, set up in 1937 to study ordinary life and anthropology of ourselves, as it was described. And the investigators used a variety of methods to collect information. So they recorded overheard conversations on buses, on the street, in cafes. They asked people to answer questionnaires. They asked people to send in diary entries. And it's often thought of as a very inclusive, democratic source for the study of everyday life. And it's one of the kind of world-leading sources for histories of mid and late 20th century Britain. But despite the variety of voices it contains, the vast majority of material that mass observation gathered was written by adults. And most historians who've used mass observation use it to tell the story of adults. And actually the mass observation founders themselves weren't particularly interested in any of the children's material that they collected, because they did collect material from children. And mass observation attracted quite a lot of a significant number of teachers who wrote for it as diarists, or who wrote day surveys, or responded to the directed questionnaires. And they also attracted several teachers who wanted to kind of help by observing their pupils. And so there were a handful of teachers who set their pupils essays on a whole range of subjects and collected them from their classes and then sent them off to mass observation.
So we've both used mass observation quite a lot in our work. Some might say too much. I would never say that. Quite a lot. And we've also used it with our students. And you know, at the point at which this project was about to begin, we kind of thought we knew mass observation really well. But of course, mass observation can always surprise you. So when we first came to the Keep to look at the writing by children that eventually became this book back in 2014, when we were getting ready and we were thinking about that as a thing, that's nearly 10 years ago, and how, again, that doesn't seem like that long ago. It was before the material was digitised. And so going through by hand through the boxes of material, we were just amazed by how rich the essays were, and also by how numerous they were. So mass observation has literally thousands of essays written by children in the collection. So we immediately realised what a precious sort of resource this was, because it's quite rare to find historical sources written by children, especially working class children. When historians try to sort of tell histories of people's experiences as children in the past, they usually have to rely on institutional records from orphanages, workhouses, religious, educational or charitable organisations. Right.
So sorry.
That's all right. Come in. We've only just started. So historians do tend to go to organisations and get records from organisations to look at children's experiences. Or if they want to go down a more experiential route, they might go to memoirs and other kinds of autobiographical sources. But these are records that are written by adults about their experiences as children, rather than, as children, writing about that time. And I think it's fair to say that accounts written by children while they are children are quite scattered, scarce and fragmentary, particularly for the period that we were looking at, the 1930s. Over the last 10 years, historians of childhood and education have been really trying more to get at children's own accounts. And we're not the only people who are doing this work, and I think it's really important to flag that. There are some really brilliant projects being done on secondary education after 1945, which is also trying to find accounts written by children. And historians like Laura King, Laura Tisdale, and James Greenhall have all been trying to put children's accounts at the centre of their work. So we see our work as contributing to this. We published a couple of academic articles based on the children's essays. One was about children and emotion, the other was about children's understandings of class. And these articles were based on the collection as a whole. Within the collection, there are children's essays from girls and boys aged from 7 right up to 16 from all around the country. But the majority come from Bolton and the Northwest, where mass observation based its investigative activities in its early years.
So that was that, and we did those academic articles, but we wanted to do more with it, didn't we? And as we were doing the work for the academic articles, there were certain ones of the essays that stood out, and because quite unusually actually for mass observation, because often you don't know, particularly in the kind of observations that are done, you don't usually know the names of the people who are talking. But obviously, because these kids are writing them in their class, they all write their names at the top of their essays. And there was one particular class of 12 and 13-year-old girls who were more prolific than others. And they came from this school, from Pikes Lane Elementary School in Bolton. And they were taught by a Miss Kemp, who was a 21-year-old Bolton girl herself. And she just got really interested, obviously living in Bolton, where mass observation based a lot of their early activities, and she just got interested in the project. And at various points, she set her class of these 12 and 13-year-old girls, she set them various essays to write on all sorts of different subjects. So how I spent my holidays, the royal family. She asked them to write about what I learn at home that I don't learn at school. And it means that for these 41 girls in this class, for each of them, we had this set of essays that just gives us such an insight into their individual lives. And so as we traced the thoughts of these individual girls. We kind of got to know them, we got to care about them, and they wrote really kind of passionately, really articulately. They told us about what they did, they told us about what they'd done, they told us about what they wanted to be when they grew up. I mean, I think one of our early favourites was 12-year-old Madge, who she wanted to be an author when she grew up, and she talked about spending her spare time trying to make up good, sensible poems. And her ideas, she kind of struck us by how kind of forthright and independent she was in her ideas. So she wrote about hell. She was asked to write about hell. And she wrote about the devil, that people say he burns you in a fire, but I don't think that's true. He, the man who has no power, is trying all he can do to take God's. And she told us that what she appreciated most in other people was friendship, love, and kindness.
That's very mature, isn't it?
It's very mature, and it really, she was one of the ones that really caught our attention very early on, wasn't she? But she's writing, it kind of had an immediacy that cut across, there are 8 decades separating us at this point, and we kind of, the writing felt really, really fresh. So she wrote about what she wanted to be. Well, at one point she talked about being an author. Elsewhere, she thought about what it would be like to be a farm worker. And this is her writing, she says, she writes about, just think how nice the fresh cream would be. Anyone who reads this, I hope it does not make your mouth water, as it has made mine. The years will soon pass, so here's the farm. And it kind of, again, we were looking, this wasn't digitized, we were looking at in these boxes, we'd had no idea what to expect. And it was that kind of, it felt like she was speaking to us, directly to us. And then it got better.
It did, because as part of mass observation study of Bolton, mass observation kind of went to basically set up camp in Bolton for 3 years in the terraced house and kind of investigated every aspect of Bolton life. And they employed paid investigators to do their work there. One of these paid investigators was a young man called Frank Corson, who was just out of Oxford and interested in education. So because of that, he was delegated to find out more about the school. And as part of his research, he made a number of pen sketches of Pikes Lane children. He wrote their names down, and then he gave a description of each of the girls. About one girl, he commented, father, lorry driver, swears a lot. Spoil v scold. Mother admits can't manage her, very funny looking. Father made her stick up for herself, very pugnacious, plausible, telltale, very unpopular, the crooner at the concert, untidy clothes. And he was actually describing Madge. And we were really moved by this contrast between these kind of careless comments, this snapshot assessment of what this girl was, essence of the girl, and this kind of beautifully articulate and carefully, neatly written essays. And in part because Corson was so disparaging of a lot of these girls, we wanted to find out more about them. So I think it's fair to say that we became obsessed with finding out more about these girls. I think the rest of our work might have been sidelined in favour of this investigation. And we subscribe to genealogy sites. Some of you may have used things like Ancestry. I think one of us was better at that work than the other.
Well, we're more obsessed.
It's fair to say Hester did become very obsessed with Ancestry. And we just wanted to find out as much detail as we could about these girls. Where had they been born? Did they have brothers and sisters? What did their parents do? We searched the 1939 register, which was an official survey of the English and Welsh civilian population, which was conducted just after the outbreak of war in order to help with the allocation of ration books. And that was really useful for us because we were able to look there and find out what the girls were doing in the immediate months after they left school. So
you were detectives.
we were detectives, and that's what it kind of felt like. Even if it felt like being detectives, that we were kind of learning new skills, which as historians, we're kind of used to doing that detective work, but not this kind of work of really drilling down into an individual life and trying to piece it all together.
And imagine
And imagine it. It was really, it was, and you got a real payback from it, because you would literally find out the information. So by using the register, we could find out what they were all doing in 1939 after they'd left school. And then we also went to the local archives in Bolton, a place we have, I think, both come to just love, Bolton in the northwest. We looked through the school's records, and we looked at lots of old photographs of the town. We then, and this is where it does get a little bit obsessive, we walked around the streets where they lived, the ones that still existed that haven't been cleared. We sat in the park where they played, and of course we peered through the gates of Pikes Lane, and we'll say more about Pikes Lane later.
But then the best bit was that in the end we decided that we needed to seek out their descendants. So we worked with, at this point, however obsessive and all our new skills and so on we hit a rock, and we had to hire a genealogist who was much better than us, and actually was just magically able to do that discovery work, but was very enthusiastic as well, so kind of got infected by the same enthusiasm with us. And almost overnight she'd got back to us with a few potential names and addresses. And eventually she managed to track down contacts for about 3/4 of the class. So these are children who were born in the 1920s, had children in the late 1940s, early 1950s. So she was finding addresses and potential contacts for those children who were in their kind of late 70s by the time we would be talking to them. And Jessica was incredibly helpful at this point, and thanks to Jessica, we were able to send out the letters. Jessica, I think you would
send some letters. That's things, but okay.
You
did it in the well. So
the enthusiasm in the act of doing it.
I did it, and I did it properly.
You did it very promptly. and then very promptly as well. We had this kind of short period of waiting.
There's a question about how many letters. I remember there being quite a few.
Well, so there were 41 children in the class. Obviously, some of them she wasn't able to get. I mean, the Smiths or whatever would prove too tricky. But she managed, I think there were about 30 letters that we sent out in the end. Some of which may not have been, some of which may have gone to a wrong address, or, the person didn't live there anymore, or indeed we didn't get replies from. But very quickly then they started replying, and we had about a dozen relatives getting back to us within about 2 or 3 weeks, including Madge's daughter, which was an exciting moment. And I think she rang. I think I rang Madge's daughter, and I was texting Claire saying, "Madge's daughter, I've just spoken to Madge's daughter." We had all these plans, we made plans to go up, and actually there were too many. We thought we'll have a long weekend there, and then there were too many. We think, okay, we're going to have to plan another long weekend to go and see the rest. So the first long weekend was booked. The Bolton trip was planned. We knew our timetable, we had the times when we were going to see everybody. It was the 23rd of March 2020 that trip was planned for. So instead, everyone stayed at home. And it was literally, it was a weekend that the first lockdown was announced, that we would have gone up to Bolton. And we we eventually have now been to Bolton, and we've met some of those, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, we missed those initial meetings. We ended up talking to them anyway, so we did it. We did a lot of it over the phone. At that point, nobody knew how to use Zoom really. So we did it. A couple of people we did Skype, but mostly it was phone.
A little bit FaceTime.
But it was a really intense an emotional experience talking to the relatives. I mean, I think partly because it was, you know, the early days of kind of April 2020, so that whole period was surreal anyway. But it was also something about speaking to the children of these girls that we'd kind of been so immersed with and kind of felt that we really knew. And also it was really weird speaking to their children when we knew the girls as kind of these, we had in our heads these kind of living, breathing, you know, articulate 12 and 13-year-old girls. And then we were speaking on the phone to 70-year-olds, their 70-year-old children who were grandparents, you know, maybe talking about their own grandchildren. And it was like we kept making the mistake and accidentally describing them as their mums. It's like to ourselves, we never did it to them. But it was like the generations had been swapped. It was really weird. But of course, it meant that at last we could find out a little bit more about the Pikes Lane girls. We could connect their childhood dreams with what they actually went on to do. And we asked their sons and daughters about what they remembered about them and how their lives turned out. And so the book, in essence, is about what we discovered.
So we thought we'd read a couple of extracts during the course of this sort of discussion. And I'm going to read the first one, which is from a chapter which is on the coronation. Although we may all feel a little bit coronation doubt, but bear with us. And this particularly features one of the girls called Constance. So it was on 7th of May, at the end of a week of rehearsals, that Miss Kemp asked her class to write about what they might like to be when they grow up. It was no surprise, perhaps, that royalty was at the front of Constance's thoughts. She writes, "My ambition is to be a very select lady servant, like the Duchess of Kent, because I like waiting on people, and I should see the little newborn baby. I should be able to see the dresses they wear, and if the Queen Mary came, I should have to wait on her. I'd be delighted, if possible, to see the princesses and the King and Queen. My work will be to keep clean the room in which they dine, set the table, wash up, and do everything about the cookery, and at Christmas I should buy the babies toys." Now at 12, Constance already had some of the necessary skills for service. She was proud of knowing, quote, how to make beds and clean shoes and how to polish furniture and clean windows. She'd learnt this by copying her mother. Number 17, Lockback Street, where she lived, was always spotless. Much later, Constance's daughter would associate the smell of Dettol with her grandparents' outside toilet, scrubbed down by her grandma 3 times a day. Constance was always well turned out too. She said, "Mother is always teaching me different things. I learned to wash my hair, cut my finger and toenails. I know how to clean my teeth and how to walk properly and talk properly." Even so, she knew that royal service would require the highest of standards. I should have to train for it, she realised. I could not go without any experience, because being a high lady's servant is a great honour. In fact, I should have to go to train about 3 times a week, and that would be a lot of money to go to a really experienced woman who knows everything about etiquette. Constance's daydreams will change when she meets Charles, the handsome young Welshman from Pontardawe. Can you say that word?
Pontardawe, isn't it?
Thank you. Who is stationed in Bolton with the RAF during the war. They will learn to dance together, and when their second child is born and develops respiratory issues, Charles will take his young family back to Wales to get them away from Bolton's smoke. It is hardly Buckingham Palace, but when they dance every evening together in the Welsh valleys and live out a long, happy marriage, it will feel a long way from Bolton nonetheless.
As we were writing the book, we made a decision quite early on to move a lot of sections into the present tense. And that's very different to anything that we'd written before. So other things that we've written, whether we've done it separately or together, have been, I mean, well, a lot of it's straightforwardly for an academic audience, or academic trade audience. But this was very different from anything else that we'd written. And it meant that we had to think really carefully about who the readers would be and how they might want to engage with the material. And so we looked at different models. The author John Benson has written a book called The Valley, which traces his family history of his mining ancestors across the century. It's kind of novelistic portrayal, and that is written entirely in the present tense. Another inspiration was Alison Light's book, Common People, which is a more historical account of her family history. And she uses a short introduction for each chapter as a kind of scene setting introduction, and she uses the present tense for that. I think we kind of went in between in the end. So our book is pretty much half-half, and we switch constantly between past and present. Present when we're talking about the girls' lives, hopefully to kind of give it an immediacy. The past when we're talking more about the historical background. And we do also, as we just did in that section, sometimes use the future as well if we're thinking about the girls at the time and what their future lives are going to be. And I suppose that the trick was trying to avoid that sounding formulaic, but hopefully we kind of managed to do that.
We did spend a lot of time thinking about it, didn't
Yeah.
we? And sort of moving it in and out of different forms, really, different ways of expressing it. We also use the present tense when we use some of the broader mass observation material that we used to map out the landscape of Bolton in 1937. I mean, because they were there so long, there is so much stuff about Bolton in the archive. In some ways, it's probably the place that's easiest to know about in the whole of the UK in that period. And in some ways, I think we're being true to the purpose of mass observation, as Tom Harrison, its founder, envisaged it, probably more true to that than perhaps the ways in which later historians, including us, have used it. Harrison wasn't a historian, he was an anthropologist. And the fact that he created this massive historical archive was really a byproduct, not his primary purpose. He was more interested in that anthropological sense of exploring a town from the inside out. So a lot of the lovely little details that are scattered across mass observation, like the fact that a little girl in the cinema is wearing a red bow in her hair, is of little historical import, but actually becomes a key part of this visual picture that you can build up of a particular place in a particular moment. And Hester's now going to demonstrate that through a particular reading.
So this is from earlier in the book, and this reading is from is a description of Parkinson Street. So Parkinson Street is one of the streets where two of our girls lived, and two of our girls that actually we managed to speak to relatives of. And we based this description on, so Mass Observation did a similar kind of study of a street or description of a street. It wasn't Parkinson Street, but we thought about their description, we transferred it to the girls, to where the girls lived. And it comes just after a chapter about the cinema. So it follows in 1937 in Bolton, the new Odeon opened. So we've just talked about that. After the sparkle of the Odeon opening at the weekend, Monday morning dawns and the town eases back into the normal routines of a working week. Parkinson Street, a small terraced row of 34 houses, is home to both Joan at number 31 and Marion at number 22. It's not long past 5 o'clock and both girls are still sleeping soundly when the quiet of the early morning is broken by a vehicle revving in the distance and the footsteps of a tram driver on his way to work. Next door to Marion, at number 24, Joseph Chadwick lies awake. Age 72, he's the street's oldest inhabitant. He used to work as a lamplighter and would once have been the first to stir, out to tend his lamps in a reminder of a pre-electric age. He no longer needs to wake so early, but old habits die hard. Women rouse themselves and attend to the fires in their hearths. One house at a time, cracks of light appear behind curtains and smoke trails upwards from chimneys. There's the rattle of a bin lorry and the noise of a man shoveling coal. Milk bottles are left on doorsteps and posters pushed through letterboxes. A baby is crying somewhere and there is the sound of a lavatory being flushed. Joan hears her next door neighbour's door bang as he leaves for work. He's a gardener and a gravedigger, or so he describes himself in the 1939 register, and he wants to take advantage of the early light and the warm morning. Marion is up now and helping her younger sister. She prepares breakfast for them both. She'll write about doing this and gets her ready for school. Their mother is 6 months pregnant and glad of her eldest daughter's help. Marion has also been busy knitting baby clothes. Next is the clatter of clogs as mill workers leave for the 8 o'clock shift. 1/3 of the working adults on the street, men and women, are employed in cotton in some capacity. In a couple of years, Marion and Joan will be among them. Parkinson Street itself is sandwiched between mills, as are so many of Bolton's streets. Those men who aren't employed in mill work work mostly in the construction industry, the ironworks, the bleach works, and the railways. They leave too, some carrying their lunch in handkerchiefs or paper bags, heads down and readying themselves for the day ahead. And then the street is full of children heading off to school. They are noisier than the workers and they laugh and jostle. They are more colourful too, the girls with bright dresses and ribbons in their hair. The children split off in different directions, Marion and Joan veering north towards Pikes Lane. Mildred Beswick at number 34 is out cleaning the front windows of her corner shop, and she pauses to smile at the children who wave to her. Aside from Mildred and Emily Gethings at number 26, who works in a fish and chip shop, those women who aren't employed in cotton are housewives and young mothers. Now they've seen their older children off, they attend to their housework. Their children and maybe husbands will be back at noon for their dinner. Monday is the weekly wash day in Bolton, as in other working class towns, and the backs of the terraces begin to fill up with the laundry that's pegged out on the washing lines that stretch between the sheets. Rows of floating pillowcases, sheets and shirts like these will capture the imagination of mass observations photographer Humphrey Spender, who makes a special study of them. Come the afternoon, and Parkinson Street is quieter again. A rag and bone man passes through, and then later a window cleaner touting for business. A man is out sweeping his yard, and for a few moments, his rhythmic brushstrokes are the only sound. If toddlers allow, there might even be time for mothers to sit down and have a cup of tea. The bulk of the washing is done, and the ironing can wait till tomorrow. The schools empty out, and from now on, there will be children playing around the houses until dark. It's a part of the day that Joan loves. When Miss Kemp asks her to write an essay on money, Joan will turn up her nose at the fine clothes of the rich, as she calls them, which means that the rich children are not allowed to go out unless it's very warm, and they're not allowed to play on summer nights. The children tend to congregate in the back streets, running, skipping, throwing balls, perhaps chalk and graffiti on the yards and walls. Earlier in the year, Mass Observation had made a study of children's chalk marks. They record many drawings of heads and faces, executed with varying levels of skill, but also haphazard scrawling, hearts cut through with arrows, and only occasionally the crudest scribblings of body parts. The early evening is busy. A few leave for the attractions of the town centre, perhaps even to try out the new Odeon, or for a stroll in nearby Queen's Park. People are popping in and out of the corner shop. The man at number 11 leaves for his weekly trip to the local wrestling stadium in a converted mill on Turton Street. He's unemployed at the moment, which makes attendance trickier, especially with a young family. But he's the keenest of fans, and for the moment continues to find the sixpence he needs every Monday for the cheapest standing place. The best thing about it, he tells Mass Observation, is that it teaches self-defense. He writes that if I had 100 children, they'd all have to watch All in Wrestling with that one view. By about 9 o'clock, children are starting to be called in and lights begin to be switched off. Mildred Beswick has already shut her shop. and turned the sign around in the window. Activity slows with the fading of the summer light, though from somewhere comes the sound of a man's voice singing. People slip home, and one by one, the houses darken. By about midnight, everything is quiet.
I think we wanted to read that at length because I think it gives you that sense of how we were trying to create the story of a particular place in a particular time, and that sort of attention to the very detailed notion of the day and how it changed was really important to us. But there were other things that we had to think quite hard about, and one of them was how we would weave each girl's life throughout the book. We chose 17 sort of main characters from the class of 41, and we chose these either because we've spoken to their relatives or because their essays were particularly rich for whatever reason. When we first started thinking about how to put the book together, we had a kind of what happened next chapter at the end of the book, which would have been like, here are the girls, and then da-da, this is what, and we were going to explain, you know, what they ended up doing and all of that. And then we realized that this was essentially following quite a sort of academic biographical trajectory. So we ditched it, and I think in the end, we used an approach through which the girls kind of move in and out of the book hopefully far more fluidly. You know, each girl's story starts in a different place and ends at different points in the book. This did involve quite a lot of thinking. And it's at one point we had all the girls on different index cards, and all the topics on different index cards, and like spread them all out and like a jigsaw, trying to work out who should pop in where, who was best to feature in which chapter, and all of that stuff. And this was made quite significantly more taxing because we were doing this on Zoom, because basically the entirety of the writing process was during COVID lockdown. So we submitted the manuscript in March 2021, and it really was a lockdown project. I mean, of course, during that time, as you will all remember, everybody had to find their own strategies to get anything done, really. And I think for us, it was the collaborative nature of it that kept us going. I mean, even though we were working on Zoom, I think writing the book together became a thing that we both really looked forward to doing. We'd set up Zoom first thing in the morning, and then we'd kind of do our work, and I'd have a sort of little minimized, the way you can with Zoom, a little minimized Hester, kind of keeping me company out as I worked in my bedroom at my desk every day. And I think it is a book that has a lot of feeling within it because of the richness of the girls' essays and the encounters with the family. But I think it also has a lot of emotional or emotion attached to it for us as well. I mean, they're just COVID lockdown and this book are just they're absolutely linked now.
But in a joyous way.
Yes,
as well.
yes.
There's the thing that made it, was one of the things that made it bearable.
Yeah, and I would say, I think that doing it with Hester, who I have to say, if you're ever looking for somebody to do a project with, she's like really great. Really just for me, sort of kept me going during that time in a really kind of lovely way.
It wasn't, obviously, it was the whole thing was collaborative, and not just between us. So there were other collaborations. We mentioned Jessica helping out, and mass observation generally. I mean, the team at mass observation are one of the reasons why mass observation is such a lovely archive to work with. We also, there was the collaboration with the families, and we kept in touch with the families throughout. So we of course, when we initially wrote to them pre-lockdowns, of course, we told them that we had their mother's essays, and we sent them obviously sent copies of the mother's essays to them. And that process, and again, probably combined with the lockdown and sitting in a house with nothing to do, prompted quite a few of them to then start thinking a bit more about their own histories. They did their own research into their mother's lives. And kind of there was a trickle as the started coming of things that they discovered. So photographs, going the wrong way. And kind of photographs and other paraphernalia that they dug up. So one of the main girls, she pops up quite a lot, is a girl called Alice, and she's the one second from the left in the back row. And this photograph was found by Alice's daughter, who we'd spent a long time speaking to Alice's daughter and Alice's two daughters actually. And one of them had then gone, and she'd spent ages going up into the loft, and she'd got down all her mum's old stuff and gone through it and everything, and she'd found this photograph, and it was just, I mean, seeing the photograph is amazing. So these are the Pikes Lane girls, or some of them, slightly younger than they would have been when they wrote the essays. But she'd written on the backs some of their names. Some of them she couldn't. She'd obviously written it as an older woman and couldn't remember all of them. But several of these girls were, you know, we knew, as it were. Other photos too. So again, sons and daughters sent us photos. So some were posed. So Molly obviously is in a kind of photographer's studio. There's Alice again, this time in a school play. Annie, this is one of my favourite photographs. So this is Annie at Blackpool and on a Blackpool weighing machine. And so she's just, so this is June 1937, and she's just over 5 stone at that point, which is very small and slender for a girl, just turned 13. But again, matching that photograph, as you can imagine, like seeing the photographs and then being able to put their faces to these girls we knew was very special. But also matching them to Corson's description. So Frank Corson describes Annie as clean, well-behaved and neat appearance, which I think does match her description. In keeping with good oral history practice, we also kept families up to date with what we were writing. We sent them various drafts concerning their particular relative. We had to go through ethical approval with the university, which was a little bit, or we got a little bit anxious about that, because of course university processes are all based on kind of social scientific and scientific models that privilege anonymity. So there were all these questions about how are you going to make sure that it's anonymous, and of course the whole point was that it's not going to be anonymous. But anyway, that all went through. We did give the families the option of giving their mothers pseudonyms if they wanted to, but in fact actually in the end they all wanted their real names to be used. At the end anyway, at the beginning some of them said, oh, we'll have a pseudonym, but actually by the end they all went to real name, and I think that says something about the way that hopefully the collaboration built trust.
So the book came out in July 2021. We'd always planned to go up to Bolton to launch the book, but again, not least because the Northwest had a particularly tough time during COVID. We ended up having a quite low-key outdoor book launch on the grass at Sussex University across the road. The paperback came out in April 2022. And so for this, we were finally able to go up to Bolton for the first time since 2019 to do some events in conjunction with Bolton Museum. We also took the opportunity to go to Blackpool, which was also lovely, and also a place that Mass Observation spent a lot of time studying. It was absolutely wonderful to finally be able to meet the families face to face, to have a cup of tea with them, and they also got to meet each other, which was really lovely. Some came to this event and some brought more photographs with them to this event. Some brought their friends to the event, because I think their mother's words kind of mattered to them. And again, there was a lot of emotion in the room. I think that we were I mean, I am a bit of a crier, to be honest, anyway. But we, I think, did feel really, really moved by the experience of meeting the families. And I think it was really important and instructive for us to see the very many different dimensions and textures of collaboration in that room. That it wasn't actually all about us. It was about their families and their relationships with each other as much as anything else. And it was about their lives, about their communities, and about their family histories. Sadly, one of the women who we had spoken to and who had been due to attend had died suddenly, literally a couple of days earlier. And her 4 daughters, who were the grandchildren of the 1937 child, told us they came, and they told us that they had come to honour their mother's involvement in the project, which was a really beautiful and, again, very moving thing to do.
And we also got in touch with Pikes Lane School. So it still exists. It's a 10-minute walk from the centre of Bolton. It's now Pikes Lane Primary School. So when our girls were there, it taught children from age 5 to 14, because children didn't go at that age. 14 was the school leaving age, but you didn't go to secondary school unless you got scholarship, unless you paid. So most children are at elementary school till the age of 14. But obviously now it's a primary school, so it's 5 to 11. And we went into the school and we spoke to the children in their assembly. And it was gorgeous. And I think in academia, we're always being told to think about the nature of impact and engagement and knowledge exchange. And it always feels quite kind of clinical, and what can you do and how can you maximize it, and where, where's the evidence, and but just the joy of seeing these kids kind of really enthused and engaged with the history of their school was amazing. And I think in an age where history and the humanities more generally is very much under attack from all sorts of different levels. There were these little kids asking how did we become historians, and how could they be historians? And that felt very special.
And did we write horrible histories?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we disappointed them on that score, unfortunately. But we want to finish with a short film that was made by the Year 5s. So these are the 9 and 10-year-olds at Pikes Lane in collaboration with Bolton Museum. Bolton Museum are trying to get Bolton schools generally more engaged with local Bolton history and mass observation. So one of the essays that our girls wrote in 1937 was titled "What I Did in My Easter Holidays." And so this was in May, what year are we? 2022. And so the kids at Pikes Lane had just had their Easter holidays, and the Year 5 kids looked at the girls' essays in class, and then they wrote their own. And the film that they produced was shown at the launch of the paperback, where we had the public, the kids, and the families there. Now Pikes Lane itself looks very different now. All around the surrounding streets, a lot of them were demolished. After the war. The University of Bolton now has a lot of that land. And the demographic has very significantly changed. So today, Pikes Lane School, primary school, has about 400 children in it. There are 32 different languages spoken at that school as a first language. And the original building isn't there either. So new premises opened in 2000. If you stand in the playground and look around, there are still mill towers that dot around the skyline, but they're now derelict or turned into flats or offices or whatever. There's a mosque and there's a Sikh temple a couple of 100 yards from the school. So in kind of visually, there's a lot that's changed. But I think what really struck us actually is how similar in many ways the continuities of working class life are across the century, really. So if we can get it to work and share screen. So just have a momentary pause. I've lost the arrow on the computer. The pointer's gone. Where is it?
Oh, that's my worst nightmare, that. Notice I'm not rushing to help.
Yeah, exactly. This is what collaboration is.
I know, it's like, this is where it actually breaks down.
Hang on. Right, hang on. There we go. Stop that share. Has that stopped? Yeah. Okay, and then this is the video.
This is why it's great working with Hester, because she can do this.
Well, yes, don't speak too soon. Right, I think this might work. Is that?
Yeah, it's coming on. It's not quite on yet, but it's not
It's, I haven't pressed play yet. Is
Yeah.
that, yeah.
good.
We're 5 from Pipeline Primary School, and we like to tell you what we did in our Easter holiday. How I spent my Easter holidays. Coincidentally, unfortunately, this year's Easter holidays began the same time as Ramadan, the special blessed month in which Muslims fast and spiritually grow and become closer to God. For me, therefore, the Easter holidays were more about starting Ramadan the best way possible, and not as much about Easter itself. Although my love for Easter eggs was at an all-time high whilst I was fasting. As I turned 10 a week ago before Ramadan, I made an intention to fast for the whole month, and this is how it went. My brother woke me up for supper, the time before sunrise, and when we have a small meal to begin our fast. It wasn't easy to wake up at 3:30 when normally at that time I would be in deep sleep. However, once I was awake, I was more excited than ever because I was about to keep my first fast. And not only that, Sehri was the best family time ever. At Sehri, my dad would make the yummiest masala tea, and I would dump my favorite biscuits in one by one and enjoy them so much. My brothers would laugh and joke with me, and my mum and dad would share interesting stories with me about their childhood.
On Good Friday, we decided to go to Barrow Bridge, but when we were ready to go, it started to snow. So, when it stopped a little, we went to my Auntie Teresa's at Queen's Park and stayed there all day. And at night, we went to the Regal to see Broken Blossom. On Saturday, we went to my auntie's again, and my mother went in town, but I did not go because I had made arrangements with my friends to meet them in the park. At night, again, we went to the Regal to see the 10th Man. When we got home, my cousin came in with a little black and white kitten and said that my uncle had left it for me.
My family and I go out. We do some shopping. Me and my sister pick up some Easter eggs. We go back home and my dad takes us to Queen's Park or gets his ice cream. My dad takes us home and at 12 o'clock he goes to do some Uber deliveries. Meanwhile, my mum has a delicious meal ready for us. We finish our food and then eat the Easter eggs we bought earlier. My brother usually cries in his chair for a chocolate egg, but since he's too young for a big chocolate egg, my mum gives him to some Nutella instead. The next day, me and his siblings go play outside. I stayed home today, prayed the Islamic holy book, the Quran, and prayed one of the prayers. I spent most of my time playing with my cat Coco, watching shows and playing games on my iPad. At 2 o'clock, I went and played outside with my friend for 2 hours.
Easter Sunday, I did not want to go to my auntie's because I wanted to play with my kitten. But before I got up, my mother told me that she bought me an Easter egg and my grandma had given me one. So I broke it and took care of my grandparcel. On Monday, I only took my little cousin Edith to the park and we went into the flower beds.
Most of my holiday at my relative's house. My relative lives next to a pond which had little fish in it. Me, my family, and my relatives went for a walk around the park. But then we found a small hill where we had a picnic and I ate crisp chocolate and pickles. It was the perfect spot for lunch and I watched sunset. On my Easter holidays, I didn't really do much because I don't celebrate Easter, but I had lots of fun because it was my birthday and I loved it. After a few days, my friends came over and we played so much. And because my friend doesn't know how to play football, which is totally okay, I started teaching her. And she was scared because she thinks I kicked too high. I also went to her house as well. Then a few days later, I went to a restaurant.
As I was playing out on April Fool's Day at Hot Flag, my uncle said to me, "What's in your chin?" And I said, "Not this time." So away he went. Later, a little girl came to play, so I said, "Look at the back of your leg." She did, and I said, "You are an April fool."
I went to my niece's house. When I arrived, we played with the baby for a bit. After that, my niece's mom, my cousin, called us and told us we were going to make gingerbread houses. Me and my niece were going to be in one team, and her little sister and cousin were also in another. My cousin had to help the other team since they are younger, but our team did it independently. I didn't have a very good Easter break because on Good Friday, my body decided to catch chickenpox. So the day started off with my mum visiting different stores until she found calamine lotion, as did in the car, of course. After it dried, I decided to watch House, a TV program about a doctor who diagnoses patients. He's very good at his job, but he lacks social skills. My mum used to watch this program when she was younger and found it for me on Amazon Prime. Today I went to my first ever swimming lesson. Then we went to McDonald's because I was really hungry. We went Asda for shopping. There was so many Easter stuff. My dad let me get a big Easter bunny plushie. It's so cute. Then we went Profit Center. We went on so many rides. I even won a life-size Rubik's Cube.
On Good Friday, it was snowing, and not many people went out. In the morning, I went nowhere, but after dinner, I went for a walk around town. There was a lot of people about, and I didn't expect that there would be a lot around. At night, I went to the pictures. It was very good. But if it had been fine, I would have gone to Barrow Bridge.
Me and my family went to Odeon Trafford Centre and watched the new movie Sonic 2. We entered Trafford Centre, made our way up to the cinema, got our online tickets scanned, bought some snacks, then found and sat in our seats. After 2 enjoyable hours of the movie, we left Trafford Centre and drove to a restaurant to eat.
Saturday was a lot nicer than Friday, and I went to play outside with my friend. We played all afternoon. Then at night, we went to the regiment pictures. On Sunday, the sun was shining, and I went for a walk to my auntie's. When I came back, I began to eat my Easter eggs. When it's Easter, people buy eggs and give them to the sick. Nowadays, that's the custom. Monday was a great day because I went to the park. Many people were playing tennis. When we came home, it was 4 o'clock, and we went out to play at night. On April 1st, I got called a fool because a boy said, "Look behind you," and I looked. But I had my friend a fool.
On Saturday, 2nd April, my dad called me and said, "Layla, Farika, we are going Fun Valley." When I arrived at Fun Valley, I was excited. First, I went onto the long slide, and then I went with my little sister on the tunnel slide. On Saturday, 16th April, I was going to a beach in Wales. It took 2 hours to reach the beach. And when I reached the beach, my uncle said to dig a hole, but then my right index finger got scratched by something and started to bleed. I was creating a hut of sticks I found. When I was finished, I went to the water and found 2 crabs. After I found a lot of crabs, which I call double shells, I also found seashells and rocks.
It's probably worth adding that we recently went back up to Bolton. Was it 2 months ago? I mean, time has just lost any meaning.
Yeah.
But it and met with some other classes from Pikes Lane, but also from some of the other schools that there are photographs of in the Mass Observation Archive. And then showed they watched that film, and then so it was kind of lovely because it was another layer. They were able to then talk about that class and, you know, make comments or think about the differences between the 2 sets of essays. But one of the things that Bolton Museum is currently doing is restaging some of the mass observation photographs from the 1930s with children, which is a really beautiful. We've seen some of them. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful project, and I think kind of speaks to the whole thing really. That sort of attention to children and to their experiences, and it's a lovely thing. So I think we kind of wondered if, I mean, that's it.
Do you want to discuss? Do you need to
No, I
We
didn't
doing-
do anything.
Okay.
You can, no, just say, well, thank you before we open it.